Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens with your host, Jake. Scott is on location doing his own work today, but I'm excited to talk all things Compass Box Whisky today. So we're going to be talking again, another Scotch, and they do some other stuff, I'm sure, that we'll learn about today because I'm excited to learn more about the brand. So hopefully you sit back and buckle in and listen to the latest episode of the Bourbon Lens. Racheal, thank you for joining us. And for those who don't know, Racheal is the marketing director for Compass Box, and we're excited to have you here to learn more about this exciting brand because it's some of the coolest labels in all of whiskey, I have to add.
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here and spread some Scotch love to the bourbon lovers.
Oh, well, they need to. And people hear, I hear it often. It's like, oh, I don't like malt. And I'm like, it's like in 90% of recipes that you drink. And they're like, oh, it has no flavor. I'm like, there's maltiness that comes in there and it creates all the alcohol reactions that you need to be able to make your distillate. Like, it's important. You got to like it.
Yeah, I think that's one side of it. I think that definitely is true. And I think the other side of it is that a lot of people have a misconception that most of Scotch is like peaty and smoky, which also is not the case.
True. And that'll get you real quick is like, I was like, oh, I don't, for the longest time, I was like that. And then my buddy sat me down and he's like, we're going to drink Scotch. And I'm like, oh, we're drinking what? And he's like, we're going to drink Scotch. You'll promise you'll love it. And he pulled out a Signatory Dalmore that was like 30 years old. And it was like just peachos is what it kind of reminded me of. Just like the candied peach things that are really unhealthy for you. And then I fell in love. And I'm like, that if you can get that type of flavor, mix in like sherry butts or any other type of barrel finish with this 100% malted barley, I'm in. Sold. So I've been a big fan and gone on my own Scotch journey over the last several years, and I still haven't found an appreciation for peated whiskeys in general. That's American peated or Scotch peated or turfed Irish. It just doesn't hit my palate necessarily the way I want it to, but we're learning. We'll still keep trying them, and we'll break through eventually on that.
Yeah, well, we might have something for you in that territory, actually. I don't want to jump ahead, but the Peat Monster, which is one of the Compass Box core collection whiskies, is generally the whiskey where if we do a tasting and we have the lineup and we say this is the Peat Monster, it's obviously called a monster combined with peat. Sounds kind of scary, particularly if you don't like peat. Yeah. And whenever people say, oh, I don't know if I want to try that one, I really don't like peat, we kind of encourage them to try a little taste of the Peat Monster. And generally what they find is that this actually is not a monster at all. It was a monster back in 2003 when it was first launched. Since then, people have done amazing things to push the boundaries of what, extreme peat and smoke can be. But this is a peated whiskey that's very balanced. There's a lot of sweetness in there. It's quite light. It's kind of fresh. There's a freshness to it. There's a florality to it. And I personally am not someone who can really appreciate those like really heavy hitting peated whiskeys. But the Peat Monster it's one that's good for converting people who think they don't like any peat to maybe thinking, okay, I can get on board with a little bit of peat.
I think I had one of the earlier Compass Box Peat Monsters at my friend's like party. He's like, oh, we'll try some Scotch. He's like, I got a Peat Monster for you. And I was like, oh, and like that name sounds familiar. And I was like, yeah, it made me run away. I drank it, but it made me run away from Scotch for even a longer time. But, I found an appreciation for, certain brands. And then, once you try some of the brands, then you figure out what are ones that are similar to that. And so you go to the different regions and you find out, a lot about Scotch in general, which I think is beautiful, is the way it's done. And now you have blurring of the lines, and like not all the Scotch is the same in all the regions, and people are pushing the boundaries, like you mentioned, in all of Scotch, which is super exciting to see kind of unfold as they figure out the terroir and the other ways to create, the whiskey that they want to create for the end consumer. I mean, Scotch is still huge. Obviously, it's Johnny Walker is one of the biggest brands in the world, right? For a reason. And so, if not the biggest brand in the world for a reason. So people appreciate it. You just got to find a way to enjoy it. And I think you all are doing or creating whiskey in a way to have people enjoy it. So with that, getting into this, just a little bit about yourself. You have a background in spirits, kind of all over the place. What's it like for you to kind of have navigated the industry, kind of working for one of the largest blended Scotch in Chevis Brothers, and to kind of bouncing around to other spirits brands? What's it like to kind of see the pulse and have the pulse of the whiskey industry right now?
Yeah, so I started my drinks career, as you mentioned, at Chivas Brothers, working on Ballantines, actually, which is the second biggest global Scotch behind Johnny Walker, but like considerably far behind
Yeah.
Johnny Walker in terms of volume. And my favorite thing, having been in blended Scotch quite a long time ago, having gone out into the world of startups and challenger brands, and then coming back to my kind of first love whiskey at Compass Box, is that seeing the consumer reaction to blends change. So when I worked at Chivas Brothers on Valentine's, the first thing you always had to do was defend the blend. So you'd get people being like, I only drink single malts. Blends are rubbish. I'm not interested in a blend. And the first thing you always had to do was be like, well, there's a time and a place for both. They have kind of different flavor profiles. They deliver different experiences. And there was always starting every kind of interaction with that kind of defense. And what's been really nice is that kind of coming back to a blended Scotch a number of years later is that really has changed. Like, you're always going to have single malt nuts who that is all they want to drink. That's all they care about. And that's fine. We luckily we're not interested in trying to change the opinion of those people. We're only interested in people who are interested in exploring different things. But as a general kind of like feeling from consumers, it feels as if now there is this appreciation and openness to trying blends that there probably wasn't when I started out.
Yeah. No, and I think that word has such a negative connotation for no reason, right? Like, blending is the essence of even single malts, like it is the essence of how you create, mingle, whatever word you want to use to create your final product, right? We in the States use the term small batch. Well, that is a blending of different barrels to create a profile. Your 12-year pick a brand is a blending of barrels between the ages of 12 and 14, probably because they don't have a 14-year-old, next would be 15, to create a 12-year-old single malt Scotch, right? Like, I think that is so funny that people just don't realize, like, hey, it's good to take, maybe some stuff from Highland and maybe some stuff from, Isla and maybe some stuff from wherever else and blend that together to create a profile or a characteristic of a single one-off that entices maybe a whiskey drinker that wouldn't like that region in particular, but they like that component of that blend.
100%. And I studied painting and printmaking back in the day, and I love thinking of it in terms of, you're absolutely right. A single malt is a blend of, malts from the same distillery. And if you were painting a picture and you are a single malt, creating something from the same distillery is like you have every single shade of blue in your color palette. So every single cask you pull from that distillery is a different shade of blue, and you can make a beautiful painting that is all different kind of colors of blue. But if you are making a blend and you can pull from multiple distilleries, you increase your color palette. You've got reds, you've got greens, you've got pinks, you've got, every color under the sun to bring together to create this kind of vast and beautiful balanced canvas. And that's kind of the way that I like to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really unique way to put it, because it does give a visual component to what ends up being one kind of color, at the very end, right? And, for a good blend, there's probably zero caramel coloring in it. So just get that out of the way.
Yeah, same. No coloring in any of our products.
Exactly. So you're getting a true representation. And I have two in front of me that we'll talk about. And the core lineup continues to grow as there's some other news that had just come out recently. But like, you look at the Nectarosity and the Crimson Cask, for those people who maybe see this on YouTube, there's difference in colors because the blends are different. One, the Nectarosity is a lot lighter than the Crimson Cask. And so I think that is, very interesting to me, is you're going to get, different palettes that will show up in your palette. Instead of being visual with your paint, it's going to be palette on your nose and palette on your actual mouthfeel and the flavors that you get, which I think is super exciting. Mm-hmm. So as Compass Box sits into the world of Scotch and whiskey, just generally, we talked about this beforehand, and I think you did this really well, is how would you describe Compass Box to a person? Because I use the term, is it a independent bottler, or is it an independent, is an independent blender. Like, what is it? And you use this term whiskey maker. So can you unpack that a little bit about how Compass Box fits into this whiskey maker mindset?
Yeah, so whiskey maker is a word that Compass Box invented back in 2000. And it's a word that many, many brands and many people are using now. And we absolutely love that. We love that whiskey maker has become this kind of universal term, and people seem to understand what that means. For us, when we created it, was wanting to find a term that would kind of allude to the fact that we see ourselves as, we're more than distillers. We don't distill our own whiskies. It's different to blending. We're sourcing a lot of our own casks nowadays and putting new make into them and owning that process from start to finish as soon as it comes off the still. But for us, it was also about the totality of creating a whiskey and what that means. So from the storytelling, from the label design, from working with artists to create labels that are evocative of what you're going to taste in the glass, and having this almost like complete biosphere of a whiskey that is more than just kind of the juice in the bottle. And that's why we came up with this word whiskey maker. And we're kind of proudly independent. We were founded in 2000. And, we launched really, we continue to push the boundaries. And we launched with a blended grain hedonism back in 2000 when, as we just talked about, blends were very much seen as less than, and grain was very much seen as less than malt. And we decided to launch with a blended grain. And that, for me, is kind of the best way to explain kind of what Compass Box is all about, because we don't follow the rules. We want to do things that will make people ask questions. We want to do things that will push people's perspectives of what flavor can be within whiskey.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And to be honest, I had my first grain whiskey or Scotch grain whiskey recently, and I was blown away. Like it's something I think more people should know about, right? Especially as an American consumer, where everything is a grain style mash bill. It's not just one, right? It's a multiple, grain step. I think it would be even a smarter thing for Scotch lovers to get them to try grain whiskey and then move them into single malt versus just saying, here's the single malt and go for it. I think is probably something that I would recommend doing now, knowing that that's even a category that you don't really hear about or think about much often.
Yeah. And I think, maybe partly due to the fact that Compass Box launched with hedonism and showed the world what grain whiskey could be. Lots of people are doing amazing things with grain now. So much so that, to make hedonism our kind of original product, we can't source enough of the old and rare whiskies that we need to make that very old blend. So we've had to take it out of our core collection and make it a limited annual release because we wanted to keep that kind of quality. But, it's because people are doing amazing things with grain and realizing that it's not, a filler liquid. It's something that if you put it in the right casks and you give it the right care and attention, leave it for long enough, it can be absolutely stunning. And I think, grain whiskey is probably where my heart is at in terms of if I had to only drink one style for the rest of my life, I would definitely pick grain.
So that's interesting. So what do you think of American bourbon? Like, so if you like grain Scotch, is that something that you enjoy American spirits as well?
I enjoy American spirits. I will hold my hands up and say that I'm definitely not an expert on American whiskey. My husband is very much into his American. I'm very much a kind of Scotch lover. So we have a collection that is kind of like divided in two halves, and we'll have these evenings where it's like, okay, I'm going to give you something, you give me something, and we'll kind of like go head to head on this.
Nice. I like it. That's the best way to do it, right? And you're not just touching like crappy whiskey. You have samples of the good stuff. Like you're getting to
the real good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, you want to try this 40-year-old something? We got this working over here. And I think that's what's really cool is the delicate nature of Scotch, right? Because of the second fill maturation in most of them, being aged in a different climate, I think is just like the nuance and the time it takes to create the right flavor profile for that specific barrel or that specific blend is so much more unique. Because, in Kentucky, for instance, where I sit, at 4 years, you can pretty much pull a barrel off a rack and you're good. Like you could see it's going to be exceptional, but you're like, Yep, that's got to go to pick a brand, right, here anymore, because we try to populate the world with so much American spirits because we see Scotch as, worldwide. Why can't American spirits be worldwide as well? But that's why I love that you all are coming here and dumping stuff in America, because we need to expand our palates and know that, hey, most of the time when you travel, you're going to get Jack or Jim. So you got to figure out what else you like around the world. And so I think that's been another appreciation for me is when I travel, I'm like, oh, hey, I can go drink Scotch, or I can drink, a blended Scotch or something else, because I've opened up my palate and experience because of things like we've tried from Compass Box in the past. And now excited to talk a little bit about what you all have going on right now, which is a bunch of different things. It seems like you all never stop with releases. So what's that like? You're in the marketing position to have something that's constantly growing, but also have a few shelf stable releases.
Yeah, I mean, Compass Box was a brand that I had loved as a consumer already, and as a marketer had really admired from afar. So when this kind of role became available, it felt like the absolute perfect time to jump on that. And it's a challenging brand. It's a brand that, people who know it do love it. And we're very lucky that there are people out there who buy our brand who love it as much as we do. But there are a lot of messages, there are a lot of layers, there are a lot of stories. And the challenge as a marketer is like, how do you tell people about the amazing stories behind the whiskies? And I think what we're trying to do now is shift our focus. We're still going to have some delicious limited editions because that's where we kind of really let our freak flag fly, as it were. But we wanted to create a new core collection of whiskies, of 4 whiskies that were each representative of a distinct flavor profile that exists within Scotch. So we previously had a range of 7 core whiskies, difficult to navigate, some all beautiful liquids, and some that, many people, including myself, were sad to see go. But what we wanted to do was create this kind of almost like a capsule collection. So you have these 4 whiskies and you have kind of access to all of the most important flavor profiles within Scotch. So that's what we've done.
Yeah. And so the latest release would be the Secrets of Smoke, or is that correct?
Secrets of Smoke, yep. So when we look at the core collection, we have Orchard House and Peat Monster, which have stayed. And then we introduced Nectarosity and Crimson Casks, which we can talk about. But when we do limited editions like Secrets of Smoke, they will really exist to like push the boundaries of that flavor territory to the absolute extreme. So when I talked earlier about Peat Monster being kind of lovely and balanced, and there being kind of a sweetness there that was kind of hidden and a kind of elegance, when you then get to Secrets of Smoke, the limited edition, it is kind of really unpicking the power that kind of sherry sweetness and intense smoke can have on the flavor of a whiskey. So that's kind of how we're working going forward.
Yeah, so that's the one that's going to go, like, you're going to go be an Isla fan on the Secrets of Smoke. You're going to enjoy, hot boxing a barbecue.
Yeah. Yeah. Michael Stevenson, who was previously one of our brand ambassadors, but has got an amazing palate and knows he's transitioned over into the whiskey making team recently, and he is South African. And he has taken a bottle of Secrets of Smoke to South Africa with him, and we have had some very good barbecue and Secrets of Smoke photos from him.
Oh, that'd be amazing. And the other thing I think that's super unique about from a marketing standpoint is your bottles are gorgeous, right? There is an elegance to artwork. No 2 bottles are the same outside of the core. They all have these different viewpoints and abstract art, right? So with your art background, like how much do you appreciate the artistry that goes into the makeup of the bottle and the beauty of the bottle?
I love it. It's one of my favorite things about our brand. It's also one of the, it's a challenge to find something that is maybe a little bit provocative, but that also speaks to flavor, that draws people in. And we've worked with design partners, Stranger and Stranger, for, a number of years. And we work really closely with them from almost the inception of the idea of the liquid. So this isn't like we have fully finished liquid that we then take to them and they translate it. We bring them in on the story. So our liquids are never just about, we want it to taste like this. There's always a story behind each of them. And that's where we kind of work with them to bring that to life visually as well.
And speaking of visuals, right? Like, so I just double clicked in on the Nectarosity. Your website is a treasure trove of information. It's not the first time I've been out here, but so I double clicked on the Nectarosity. It's the lighter of the two, so that's what I'm going to drink first today. I love the transparency that you give the consumer of how the blend is made up, right? So you can go through here and then you're like, okay, so maybe I get something we'll look at the Cameron Bridge Distillery. So that's the second largest part of the blend. Well, maybe I really like that. I can tell that those elements, I can see those tasting notes. So maybe now I want to go try and explore that distillery. So now you not only made them a fan of what you've created, now you have offshoots to other things that they can try to run and chase. And that's the whiskey nerd of all of us, I think, is like this type of chart and graphic.
Yeah, and honestly, transparency is one of our core values. We used to print on the back of our labels every single recipe with percentage and also the age. And as we know, the Scotch Whisky Association says the only age you can put anywhere on your bottle is the youngest in the blend. So we got in trouble. We've been in trouble with the SWA a few times, but we were not okay with not being 100% transparent about what was in the blend. We have nothing to hide, right? There's absolutely nothing in there that we hiding from anyone. I think there's potentially a bit of pressure from the bigger, more famous blends because they don't necessarily want to reveal exactly what's in their blends. But from an age perspective, you can go onto the recipe wheel and you can actually count the rings like the rings of a tree. And that will tell you the age also of each of the component parts. So you can't directly write on there, this one is, in Nectarosity, there's a whiskey in there that's up to 19 years old. And we can't really write that on our bottles anymore. But if you count the rings like the rings of a tree, you can find out how old every part in there is as well.
I like that. Find a way to make it work for you all and the consumer, which is really cool. And one of the things you mentioned was being able to do first fill. So like in the States, we do like a lot of contract distillation. Do you all do contract distillation? You partner with X, Y, and Z distillery and they run, yours, and then like that's yours to put in your barrels that you've procured and then now they're resting 10, 12, 18 years, whatever.
Yeah, so we have a few distilleries that we really love the liquid from. And so what we have done is we've got our own kind of custom casks and we are putting new make in them and we are laying that down kind of for as long as we need for our recipe. So actually Orchard House in the core collection, I think about 80% and growing of the whiskies in that blend are whiskies that we've had from new make all the way through. So I always think that is like a great expression of like Compass Box Whisky because we've kind of handled the liquid from the moment it comes off the still all the way through to the bottle. And there's some really interesting cask kind of activity for Nectarosity as well. I think you've got that in your glass here, but we obviously bourbon barrels are huge in Scotch, and we found a number of years ago that we weren't getting the flavor that we wanted out of the bourbon barrels. And what we realized was happening was that they were being rinsed, like really heavily rinsed before they were being sent to us. Totally understand why they want to get as much flavor out of them as they possibly can. But this wasn't good enough for us. So what we decided to do was source our own custom casks from a cooperage in Missouri. We get them toasted and then we bring them over to Scotland. We then put our own grain whiskey into them, season them for about a year with grain whiskey, take the grain whiskey out, pop that in another cask, put some malt whiskey in there, age that. And Nectarosity is actually the product of that kind of cask experimentation. So I actually think if you're a bourbon lover who has yet to fall in love with Scotch, Nectarosity is a really, really great place to start because we've kind of taken real inspiration from the cask techniques used by bourbon producers and kind of given that our own Compass Box spin.
Yeah, and I will say it has a very bourbon-esque nose, right? So you do get a little bit of that oak, some of that tannin kind of comes across. And it does have, traditional vanillin, honey, and the citrus kind of note, like that nectar, right, kind of pulls through. So you do get that. But then you can also, when you go through and look here, you have, a refill sherry in here, and there's another sherry barrel, I think, somewhere else in this. Or maybe that's the only sherry, or there's two sherry barrels. There's a butt and a puncheon. And so you do get that nice fruity undertone, and that makes up 30 34% of the blend. So you do get that nice sherry note that I appreciate, that gives you the plum, the fig, the raisin, all that fun stuff. And so it sits really well with the overall blend because you're getting the traditional oaky bourbon notes, but you're also getting that, oh, hey, like I am touching a delicate, more balanced whiskey. I think sometimes that's how I approach Scotch. Is I feel like it's what American whiskey wants to be. It has more balance most of the time. It doesn't have any sharp edges, much like American whiskey can have.
I love this whiskey. It's one that feels to me like an all-rounder. So when I am not sure what whiskey I want to drink, I am now reaching for Nectarosity because it kind of delivers all of the things that you've just said, but it just has this like versatility to switch between occasion, which I really love. Like there are some whiskeys that I will only have in a certain occasion, a certain moment when I'm feeling a certain type of way. But Nectarosity for me kind of traverses all of that. And I think it's because, it's got this kind of lovely sweetness, but there's depth. There's a little bit of richness from that sherry. And then there's that lovely, like bright citrusy note to it as well. So it's a good all-rounder.
It is a good all-arounder, and it's a whiskey that I think, if it's part of a core lineup, it is all around Swiss Army knife for your house, right? It is a cocktail. It is a neat pour. It is an over ice. It's got that type of versatility to it as well. And you have to have those Swiss Army knives, pick a spirit, doesn't matter. You have to have the Swiss Army knife spirits that, is going to be able to appeal to whomever's at your house that you want to share a dram with. And I think this kind of gives you that, be like, oh, well, I don't like neat pours. Maybe I like it over ice, or maybe I like it with a splash of water or whatever. This can hold up, I think, to any of those kind of combinations.
Yeah, I completely agree. We had someone make an ice cream float with it in the office, which was also delicious.
I'm not gonna say I'm mad about that because it sounds delightful. And so the one thing I think I missed on this, what's the ABV on this one?
46.
Okay, so 92. Gotta, always convert it to us. We make everything so much harder here in the States.
Yeah.
And so when did this new release come out?
So it actually launched in the UK, it launched in July, and then in the US, it launched in September. So it is very new, but the response so far has been great. I was over in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. New favorite city, by the way. Okay. Amazing. From a drinks perspective, like the back bars you see there, the bartenders there have amazing you don't just see the usual suspects. They're like really interested in finding kind of delicious things. But the feedback to this in particular, I think because of that slight kind of bourbon-esque profile has been really, really positive. So hopefully you'll start to see it more and more. Yeah, no, this is kind of one of the ones like I don't buy whiskey often. But this is something like I would want to have like to get more of for me to enjoy, because not every occasion is a bourbon occasion. Some nights I want something a little bit more nuanced and balanced, and I can sit there and I can think because I'm not doing anything. Like I'm watching TV, or maybe I'm sitting in silence with two kids running around. Sometimes silence is nice. And a puppy.
Yeah, and a puppy. All right. So those are the things that I think I'm excited about, is being able to sit down with these types of whiskeys that are enjoyable across profile. And I think, overall, this is I can't remember the press release off the top of my head, but it's got a very solid price point, I believe, in the States. I don't think it's too.
Yeah. So I think it's around $65. Yeah. So Nectarosity, this is a word that, again, we like creating words at Compass Box, but this is about kind of generosity and nectar, and it's all about that kind of amazing flavor. And we couldn't have a whiskey that was inspired by kind of generosity of flavor and not price it at a point where people could open it, share it, and enjoy it, right? We didn't want this to be a whiskey that was going to sit around on a shelf and be saved for best. We want people to kind of buy it and, as you said, sit down with friends. They're not sure if they like the flavor profile of Scotch, and they can try it with ice, neat, with water in a cocktail, however they want, and to really enjoy it. So that was important to us as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think you all nailed that one spot on. And so that leads us to the other one that you all have just added to your core lineup, which is Crimson
Casks.
And that one seems to be going over really well. Like when you do a quick Google search of Crimson Cask, like it seems like it's blown up wherever. Doesn't matter if it's an English publication or Scottish publication or an American publication. It seems like it's taken off in a really big way for you all.
Yeah, the response to Crimson Cask has been amazing. So we had 2 whiskies in the core before. There was Spice Tree and Story of the Spaniard, both of whiskies that I absolutely adored personally. And I know that kind of people who loved Compass Box love those whiskies, have always kind of been mainstays. And when we retired those whiskies, there was kind of like, I understood because I felt it too, this outcry of, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And what I like to say is that if Spice Tree and Story of the Spaniard were to come together and create a love child, that love child would be Crimson Casks, in my opinion. I think it really delivers on the things that people loved about Spice Tree and the things that people loved about Story of the Spaniard. I think this will have something for them. You know, we couldn't have a lineup of 4 core whiskies covering all of the flavor profiles within Scotch without touching on sherry. Sherry is such an important part of Scotch, but we were never going to make a sherry bomb. We don't make anything that is, you know, smacks you around the face with only one flavor. I personally love a sherry bomb from time to time, but Crimson Casks was about balance. Balance is super important to Compass Box. And that is why kind of we worked on a recipe that would definitely deliver that gorgeous kind of sherried flavor. But there's also a lot more going on in there. There's a little bit of spice. There's a little bit of sharpness. It's kind of the perfect time of year now, actually. Like it's dark and cold. Well, it's dark and cold outside in London right now. But this is a whiskey that's going to kind of like really warm you up. The end of a meal, sitting in the evening by the fire. And also absolutely delicious poured over some vanilla ice cream, like a little Crimson Casks affogato.
Oh, man. You're speaking to my heart right now. Scott's not on here to hear this, but he will on the editing side of the things. And I always talk about food and how the food pairs well with the whiskey. And then I get hungry and then I go order food normally or go make something and I wake everybody up in the house, but neither here nor there. But yeah, I mean, this is a lot of sherry, but different types of sherries, right? Like, so it's, you know, first sherry, but you have Oloroso sherry, like, and that's what I like about it. It's not just, you know, just one type because then you get nuances, right? Because Oloroso is going to be different than first full sherry butt, and then you balance it out with that bourbon barrel finish in there, which I think is going to be, you know, and that's a depth component, right? And yeah, this is a smaller blend from a component perspective.
It is,
but I think it's going to provide complexity.
Yeah, it doesn't lack in complexity at all. And I think, you know, we talked about all the different casks there, but there's also like, you know, an ex-Spanish red wine barrique, which I think, I don't know, it brings this kind of spiced note to it. It's almost like a blackberry, like crumble that's just incredible and like a bit of intensity there, but it's not kind of a traditional like sherry intensity. It's this lovely kind of red wine, dessert wine kind of feel. And again, to talk about, you know, the color thing, when you look at Crimson Casks in the bottle, I cannot believe that is an all natural. I can promise you it is, but it's so rich and beautifully dark in color, and that is all natural from the casks.
Mm-hmm. And the one thing I like about this, so you read this and you expect like boom in your face, plum, fig, raisin, that's there. However, there's a nice floral note. Like there's a brightness that is there that makes you think you're, you know, and I don't know if it's coming from the custom French oak or what's happening, but like that bouquet that kind of hits you, brightens everything up a ton on the front and back of the nose, which I think people kind of get lost in the sauce sometimes and think floral is, you know, it's hard to describe, but like this is a fresh bouquet of flowers is what I get on this. And I think that's the
dangerous part, because that's the freshness is the dangerous part, because a sherry bomb for me is like a one and done, but there's a freshness to this that means you can keep going back to it kind of glass after glass and it's not overwhelming. It's very Moorish.
Yeah, it is definitely something that Christmas Day, snow's coming down, kids have gone off to sleep and they've played with all their toys for the day, and you just sit and you get your fire going and you watch this and you sit in silence because it's been chaotic that day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love what sherry does to whiskey. And this is really, again, well balanced. I think that's the one thing I will say about any of the whiskeys I've had from Compass Box is balance. And some people might think that's a boring term. I think that's like the best term endearment that you can give to a whiskey maker at all.
Yeah, and it's really important to us. We, every whiskey we ever set out to create, and there have been with limited editions, literally hundreds at this point, balance is always a key component, and it's something that our whiskey making team search for when they're working on the recipes.
Mm-hmm. So now that you all have kind of landed on this new core product, right? Or the core 4, what's in Subtle Secrets of Smoke is out. What's on the horizon, right? So we're finishing up the busiest whiskey time of the year, November and December. But I always like to ask, what's ahead, right? What can consumers look forward to? What might maybe next that they should be on the lookout for?
I am so excited about what's coming. So, well, firstly, I'll talk to you about what's coming in February. So I mentioned earlier briefly, Hedonism became a limited annual release. The first limited annual release was in February 2024. So another first with Hedonism. It was our first whiskey. It was the first blended grain Scotch ever launched to market. And it was also the first bottle of whiskey that we know of that ever featured a female face. And so we wanted to celebrate that. So every year for the limited annual release, we're collaborating with an amazing artist, a female artist, to reimagine the original Hedonism woman. So the 2024 edition, which came out in February, we partnered with an incredible Scottish artist called Stephanie Rue, whose original painting was actually in my house for 2 months after we filmed the content. And I couldn't bear to let it go because it was so beautiful. But it is now hanging proudly in our office in Richmond and London. But those were the best 2 months of my life from a visual perspective. And so in February 2025, we partnered with another amazing artist to put her own spin on the Hedonism woman. And, we're not blindly copying the Hedonism recipe each time. We're reimagining the liquid in the same way that the artist reimagines the Hedonism woman. So there's something really interesting happening with the 2025 edition. There are some old previous fattings of previous Hedonism in there, which makes it really interesting. But there's also the inclusion of some very interesting casks, like just a hint here or there that's bringing out something that's maybe a little bit more spiced, like really complementing. One of the things I love about Hedonism is this kind of like coconut flavor, like coconut vanilla that you get with like aged grain. And there's another kind of tasting note. I've only tried a very, very small sample at this point, but there's something going on with these extra casks that is really kind of like amplifying the Hedonism character. So I'm really excited about that. And the artwork is gorgeous. And yeah, that should be amazing. And then I'll give you a bit of a kind of a sort of behind the scenes thing of something that's coming, almost a year from now. But what I will say is we talked about kind of peat monster, Secrets of Smoke being peat monster pulled to the extreme. We are working on something that is nectarosity on steroids.
I like it.
So that will be coming down the line much later next year. But the idea for me that we'll have nectarosity on steroids is like insane from a liquid perspective. So I'm all for that.
I'm all for that too. And then we need Crimson Cask on steroids. I don't know how much more on roids you can get this one, but I really, really enjoy both of them and for different reasons, right? Like time and place, I have that with Crimson Cask. Nectarosity is anytime I want to. Is there a game on? Is there, am I chilling at the end of the night or whatever, right? Like there's a lot to nectarosity that I appreciate. Crimson Cask, I'm like, I have a time and a place. And I love that whiskey has started to create for me as I've gone on this journey myself. There's time and place, and finding that sense of place for the dram has meant so much to me because all of these are moments. Sometimes, you kind of sit down and for us, you drive through 10, 15 whiskeys and you just want to review them and you want to get them done and get them out. But a lot of times I just sit and I relax with a whiskey and, it's a conversation with my son even, or my wife or my my daughter can't talk. She's one, but I talk to her, so it's even a conversation with her. And or like I'm at a football game or I'm at wherever. And those are the moments. Like, I think these whiskeys and what you all have done capture moments. And I think that's the important thing, because you want to, you may not be able to always afford one of these bottles, but you may always be able to remember that moment and that callback, which I think is a beautiful thing to be able to do and what whiskey does.
It's really interesting you say that. And I have been asked in the past, why did you want to work in drinks, or, why do you love working in drinks so much? And what I always say is that liquid is always kind of at the heart of every human connection. I'm saying alcohol has to be at the heart, whether it was like going for a walk with a coffee with a friend, whether it's like grabbing a glass of wine with a girlfriend, whether it's sitting down, having a whiskey, sharing cocktails, catching up, whether it's, celebrating love, heartache, new jobs, whatever. Liquid is always something that you share with people. And for me as a marketer, to think that my brand would be the chosen brand to be at the heart of any human connection and interaction is like the reason that we're here and that we do it for. And that's like, to think that someone would choose Compass Box to be part of any of those moments in their life is like the best reward that could possibly be.
100%. And so my daughter loves Frozen 1 and 2. And Olaf, the snowman, has a saying. He says, our water has memories. And what is the base of all of this? Water is at the beginning, middle, and end of it all. Yeah. And so I think it's really cool. It becomes really sentimental to me personally as you kind of like learn all these things and watch it out. So I think it's what you all are doing is great. And I'm super excited for the future as you all continue to put out, quality liquid that we all get to enjoy. So last question for our consumers and our listeners, where can people find out more about Compass Box and how can they go about finding it, maybe here in the States, even to have it on the shelf?
Yeah, so we're working really hard to get Compass Box into more places in the US. We're doing all right, but if you want to find out any information, I'd head to the website, which is compassboxwhisky.com. That's where you can find those recipe wheels that we talked about with full transparency of everything that's ever been in any blend, and also follow us on social media kind of at Compass Box Whisky. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you joining us. This has been a great lesson for me to learn a ton about the brand. I'm a fan. I'm really excited about what you all are putting out, and I will be on the lookout to buy a bottle of Nectarosity and Crimson Cask here in the near future. I just have to wait till after Christmas, till I buy my things for me. This is the season for everyone else. But really, really thank you so much, Racheal, for joining us. And we really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great holiday season. And listeners, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Cheers.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.